Hello, I just got back from seeing Watchmen, and I probably should not have gone today because I'm still very sick. I basically collapsed the moment I got home. I am being held up almost entirely by medication right now. But I thought it was kind of a duty I had to watch the movie and share my thoughts with you because I think a lot of you might actually go or not, depending on what I think. Because Watchmen is held very precious to a lot of you, and I don't blame you. Um, I don't think I have ever seen such a polarized reaction to any movie, even like Star Wars when the prequels came out. And that's in all stages of the production of the movie. When it was announced that the movie was even being made, there was a lot of skepticism that it would even get made. I was among them. I mean, I've heard of Watchmen getting made for years, and nothing ever came of it because a lot of people said it was unfilmable. A lot of people said that it should never be filmed, even if you could, because they said it was kind of the pinnacle of the comic art form, and that was where it should stay. You know, it really shouldn't translate over. Maybe you're right. Um, and in that sense, I'll just tell you, I liked it. I have heard a lot of people I trust, people whose opinions I very much trust, come down very negatively, extraordinarily. They were angry almost. They said it was a terrible movie, and I guess I'll address those complaints because this is actually kind of a hard review to make because I can actually see where all the negative reviews are coming from. I'll just warn you right now that this is going to be spoiler heavy. I don't even really know what I'm going to say, but there's going to be spoilers. Although at this point, I really don't have any pity for you if you're still worried about spoilers, because if you have not read Watchmen, you need to stop this video right now and go do it, because it's every bit as good as people claim it is. It's one of the best comics ever made, or graphic novels, whatever you want to call it. It's fantastic. And it's kind of like you really should read it before watching the movie. I think I do think that the only way you're ever going to get the full enjoyment out of the movie is to have read the book. I do think that if you go into Watchmen knowing nothing, people have said like if you're going to go in, you should go in knowing nothing. I disagree. I think it helps a lot to know the backstory, because there's a lot that's been excised. And what's weird is I can't actually think of much that's been cut out, but I do know a lot of the backstory has been cut out. But the script, I think, is actually pretty ingenious in how complete it actually is. You do get a lot of the backstory. You do get a feel for all of the history that goes on between the various heroes in the movie, and it's done very cleverly in musical montages and flashbacks. And I think in that regard, it's done rather well. In fact, even though the movie is quite long, it's probably over 2.5 hours, it still felt like I was kind of watching an abridged version of the book. I kind of wanted more. And probably when this goes out on disc, home video, there will probably be a much longer cut of this, and I welcome that. But I think there are maybe two kinds of schools that are going to come down on this. Those who really like the comic, and those who don't. I think those who don't are going to get pretty alienated over this story. They're going to think it's very long, very overblown, and actually a very simple story. They're not going to really appreciate these characters they don't know anything about. They won't recognize anybody. They won't know who Rorschach is. They won't know who Silk Spectre is. And it's based on a lot. It's steeped in a lot of comic book, I won't say cliches, but kind of commonalities among comic books, and the kind of connect between like Golden Age, Silver Age, and modern age heroes. The characters like Rorschach and characters like Night Owl are kind of callbacks to classic comic book characters. So you kind of have to be a fan of comics to understand a lot of the goings on and a lot of the references and homages that go on in the movie. So I guess I'll kind of address some of the major complaints I've heard, and then kind of talk about what I liked about it. One is I've heard the dialogue is very clunky, very unnatural. It doesn't flow well. That's a common problem in a lot of movies where writing dialogue is very hard. And I'll tell you, a lot of the dialogue is basically taken verbatim from the comic, which is also a problem. You can't write for a comic the same way you write for a movie. You can't write dialogue for a novel the same way you write for a movie. A lot of that, the problem is including backstory, making exposition, writing backstory without making it sound like it's exposition, writing to where you might think people actually might talk like that. And again, if you're not familiar with the book, a lot of the dialogue might sound unnatural. Like Rorschach speaks in a very peculiar way. He's a very specific way. Dr. Manhattan speaks in a very peculiar way because they're kind of on different planes of sanity, as it were. So if you're not familiar with that, it might alienate you. I think that may be a problem, and maybe the dialogue could have used some updating. I actually did not have a problem with it. I thought it was fine. I thought the action. A lot of people complained about the slow motion, the use of slow motion. I honestly didn't notice it. Although, if you pointed it out to me every time it happened, yeah, I probably might go, yeah, it's a little excessive. But seriously, I watched it. I didn't notice it. I thought it was effective. I've heard people complain that if you cut out all the slow-mo, you'd shave off about an hour of the film. I think a lot of that complaint goes back to Zack Snyder, the director of the movie, the visionary director of 300. A lot of people complained when he was announced because they didn't like 300. I'll tell you something. You know what? I didn't like 300 either. However, 300 is probably the most faithful adaptation of any graphic novel I have ever seen. If you don't like 300 the movie, you probably didn't like 300 the comic, because what's on screen is almost exactly what's in 300 the graphic novel. It's stylized, it's over-stylized, it's completely misogynistic, it's unrealistic. And, all that "this is Sparta" stuff is exactly what goes on in the comic. So, if you think the movie is crap, trust me, the comic is exactly that much crap. I don't think I've ever seen a more faithful adaptation. And if you accuse Watchmen of being nothing else, you can't accuse it of not being faithful to the source material. Which leads me into the spoiler territory, the most common thing people were angry about. This is actually the ending. Most notably, the squid. Everyone who was angry about this was angry about the fucking squid. And I don't know why you were so keyed up. You drew the line at this, guys. Some of you people were like, if the squid's not in here, it's not worth watching. Or it's not faithful to the book if the squid's not in there. Honest to God, the squid was not that important to the movie. It could have been anything. He could have, could have been Great Cthulhu he manufactured as a plot. It could have been aliens. It could have been a flying saucer. Could have been anything. And in the graphic novel, it's a giant alien that kind of looks like a squid. And I don't know why they cut it out. Probably because they thought audiences wouldn't follow along. Although, when you're involving a movie about about a giant blue guy whose dork is hanging out the entire film, you know what? Leave the squid in there. I get your argument. On the other hand, does it really matter? Is this the line you're going to draw to where you're like, you just write the movie off? You're like, no, if the squid's not in there, I don't care about this movie. I thought a lot of you were picking a fight over the squid, and the squid did not deserve the fight. Now, I will agree with you. Again, major spoiler, turn the video off if you don't want to hear it. The way they write it in the movie is that Ozymandias basically changes it from the squid. The squid is never mentioned, but he turns the giant threat he wants to unite humanity against, he turns it into Dr. Manhattan. So he blows up like a ton of Earth's major cities using a power signature, using a bomb designed after the energy that fuels Dr. Manhattan, So he makes Dr. Manhattan this great enemy, and I don't think it works as well for various reasons. Mainly because Dr. Manhattan is revered as a god, and they take great pains to play up how unbeatable and how unstoppable, unkillable Dr. Manhattan is. And I don't think it works as well as the alien squid, in the sense that the Earthlings might believe they could fight the squid. You know, if the squids ever return, they could fight them. I don't think it's as plausible to think humanity would unite against the threat of Dr. Manhattan, because the guy is essentially unkillable. I didn't really buy that humanity would unite under that banner as easily as they would have an alien. But I think that's kind of splitting hairs. That's just my opinion. And I think they managed to sell it in such a way that they made it work. You know, with the whole cancer subplot, you know, they were blaming Dr. Manhattan for cancer. They were framing him up to make him look like he was unstable. The plot to where he was designing this power generator, I thought it all blended together rather well. But the squid, you know what, it didn't factor in. If they had thrown in the squid, I might have argued that it was all as implausible to begin with, that they were fighting against aliens. One thing maybe it was just it's been a while since I've read the book. It has been a while. But I didn't quite understand how the comedian factored into all of it, how Ozymandias decided he needed to kill the comedian, how the comedian figured out this great plan, how he managed to figure it out. You know what, I must have missed it. And I think in the comic book, the comedian was flying over and he saw the alien where the squid was being designed and put together, and I think he managed to piece it all together there somehow. But I must have lost somewhere in there how the comedian managed to figure all this out and became this gigantic threat that he needed to be eliminated. Because without that, Rorschach has no reason to go investigating. Nobody else would have figured any of this out. As for the length, didn't really bother me. Like I said, I could have actually gone for a lot more, and that says a lot for the quality of the movie. I thought when I wanted to see more, a lot of people will complain that the Tales of the Black Freighter was cut out. Trust me, if I was adapting this movie to the screen, Tales of the Black Freighter would have been the first thing I would have cut out. I liked it too, but I would have cut it. That's too long, it's too peripheral, and if it had been in there, people would have complained. You spent 45 minutes on this fucking pirate story, and it goes nowhere. I mean, I understand how critical it is in terms of, like, atmosphere, plot, how it relates to Ozymandias' character arc. It's still very peripheral. I would have cut it. Let me think. I'll tell you some things that didn't work. And they are valid complaints, but they aren't movie breakers. The number one thing that bothered me the most was Richard Nixon. Man, the guy they had playing Richard Nixon is terrible. It's one of the worst Nixon impressions I've ever seen. That guy's schnoz was enormous, and this is talking from a guy with an enormous nose. That nose, you looked like you could, like, land planes on that fucking nose. It was so huge. Actually, they were really trying to play up the criticality of the imminent nuclear war, which was good. But all of that Nixon stuff was not in the book, I don't think. I don't remember any of it, really. But trust me, all that Nixon stuff was not there, and it was not a very good Nixon. The second thing that bothered me a lot was the soundtrack. There were a lot of really good moments, like the Bob Dylan montage in the beginning, but just as many times as the soundtrack hit, it missed. There were several times when I thought the soundtrack was absolutely, it just interfered. It was just blatantly horrible. And I'm not saying the music was bad, I'm just saying it really clashed with what was going on. It drew a lot of attention to itself in a very, very bad way. The most notable problem I saw was they used Nana's 99 Red Balloons as... I get its connection to the imminent nuclear war. I'm not faulting it on that, but its placement in the movie was really suspect, and it was unwelcome, and it clashed with what was going on the screen. All Along the Watchtower, got no problem with the song, but its placement in terms of the narrative, it was leading up to this gigantic climax, this final showdown, had a real problem with that. It was not welcome. I did not like it. Trust me, if Zack Snyder was going to put out a playlist, if he was disc jockeying, I would listen to Zack Snyder's playlist, but he needed to kind of put some of this inside in favor of a more traditional score. If you put the soundtrack out on disc, I would probably buy the soundtrack, but in terms of it's how well it fit into the movie, I would take issue with how well it fit. Also, the actress who played Silk Spectre, actually both of them, they were not good. which is saying something in terms of, and especially because the Silk Spectre roles they were expanded upon. I don't remember Silk Spectre being that important to the plot, and they've greatly expanded their role. I think really to throw in just more action cues to get more fighting, and that was probably some of the studio pressure was to get more kung fu fighting in the movie because there's really not a lot of action I find in the graphic novel, and really those are more kind of transitional moments to the more important character arcs. You know, the fighting is not really the key part, and so I think a lot of people complained. That was one of the more common complaints. Was they said there was a lot more action in the movie, and there probably shouldn't have been. I don't have a problem with the action being in the movie. I thought it worked rather well, and again, that kind of ties into the whole slow motion thing. You know, the swinging of the pole and stuff like that. Didn't have a problem with that. I just thought the actress playing Silk Spectre was really, she was not up to the drama that was being asked of her. And you know what, where people will, you know where you've seen her before? And it took me a while to think of this, and I actually had to do a Google image search of this to finally figure out where I'd seen her before. It was in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. You know when their car breaks down and they get picked up by Freak Show, that guy with the boils on his face? And he's like, "You can fuck my wife." And they go back and there's this hot blonde who lets Harold feel up her titties. That was her. That was Silk Spectre. And so every time I see her, I can't help but thinking, like, when Night Owl is, like, feeling up her tits and stuff like that, I keep thinking Freak Show's going to come in and say, like, "What are you doing fucking my wife? Did I say you could do that?" And, okay, but I thought Freak Show was going to kick in the door any second. But, you know what? I like the movie. I think a lot of people had either exceedingly low expectations or exceedingly high expectations. I think if you were going in there expecting to see, you know, page 1 to page, you know, the last page, expecting the absolute beginning to end Watchmen, you know, with not a line cut, you're going to be disappointed. I actually think if you're a purist, I think if you were going in there expecting a faithful adaptation, you really should be grateful for what you got. Because this is about as faithful an adaptation as I think anyone could have made out of this and kept it under about 12 hours long. I think the 4-hour cut may actually satisfy you guys a lot more. I've heard something about a 4-hour cut being released on disc. If you think something was excised, if you think something was unfaithful to the source material, you might want to wait till video, actually, just to see how that one goes, because you're going to see a very abridged version. It's going to be very long. Non-comic fans are going to wonder why it's so long. They should really read the book. But yeah, you really should be grateful for what you got here, because I thought it was actually very faithful to the source material. I thought it was good. I'm trying to find a way to word this in the sense that, you know, for all the bitching people do about how badly the studio meddles with source material, how badly it would have meddled with the lack of action, you could argue, with the blood and the gore, the various sexual undertones. They left almost all of that in here. They actually left Dr. Manhattan's big blue dork flopping around. And you know what? It's not an issue unless you make it an issue. Some of the more immature audience members may get a chuckle out of it, but had it not been there, I think a lot of people would have complained about it not being true to the source material. And they left it in there. And I think with very few exceptions could you point at something and say, that's not in there, it's wrong, it's unfaithful. So I think if you have a problem with Watchmen, you have it because, I don't know, maybe you're not a fan of the comic book, or you're too much a fan of the comic. Maybe that's the third class of people who don't like this comic, is you're too much of a fan of the comic that you can't see it, you can't bear to see it kind of bastardized into like a more visual motion picture format. You know, you fell in love with this, and this is the only way you should have ever seen it. Oh, and the cover, that reminds me. There were a few moments where I thought the movie got a little too clever with itself in terms of imagery. I thought they used way too much smiley references. Like, you know, when you pan out of Mars and you see a smiley on the face of Mars, you're like, the smiley's on Mars. I get it. It ties into the smiley and the little badge. They showed the badge way too much. You know what? I was actually kind of sick of the smiley in the trailers. You know, I was like, okay, smiley. Put the smiley in the date the movie's coming out. I get it. The smiley's there. I thought the smiley was used way too much. I thought they involved the Armageddon clock way too much, as if, you know what, this is a reference to the Armageddon clock. I get it. I don't even think it was involved that much in the comic book, except as like a little except it like marked the chapters of each book. I think they kind of showed a clock as the clock was ticking up to the Armageddon point. I thought they involved that a little too much, but yeah, the smiley's too much with that. But what else can I say about the movie? I had a good time. I'd like to see it again. I'd like to see it on IMAX. I think it'd be really, really impressive on IMAX. But that's just me. Again, you know, my taste in movies is a little suspect, shall we say. You know, I go to movies to have a good time. You know, I go to see good stories. I like to be entertained, and so some people go to movies for very different reasons. I think if you go to Watchmen expecting the same kind of transcendent experience you might have got from the comic, yeah, you'd probably be a little disappointed. I thought the comic did have a lot more impact, and I thought the movie, as long as it was, might have been a little rushed in that it didn't allow the impact necessarily to sink in, like the scale of all the death and destruction going on. The magnitude of the characters' motivations and the impact, you know, all this death had on them. Yeah, I thought a lot of it might have been a little lost. I'd actually like to see the motion comic that's on disc. I'd like to see that just to kind of compare how that plays out in comparison to the movie and to the comic. Because I think in a lot of ways the motion comic is a very good way to experience it. You know, having the comic kind of read to you. I actually like audiobooks a lot. You know, like the Game of Thrones. I like to listen to the Game of Thrones audiobooks a lot. There's something in the performance of it. You know, I can listen to it in the car and stuff like that. But anyway, it's a very specialized taste. And if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. And I don't think anyone will fault you for not liking it, because Watchmen is first and foremost a comic. It's a work of literature, and I think any kind of adaptation is bound to be a little inferior, because yeah, it is the kind of the pinnacle of the graphic novel achievement. So it's kind of there is going to be a lot lost in translation. I agree with that, but it was still a damn fine movie-going experience, and I would recommend it. I'm sure a lot of you are going to chime in. I encourage you to chime in with your own takes on it, what you thought was missing, what you thought was lacking. I would like to hear it, because I kind of want to understand why a lot of people didn't like it. Maybe the dialogue was too clunky for you. I don't disagree. I thought it worked well on my end, but maybe a lot of you, like, tell me what you thought about the characters. If anything was missing or different from the characters, or if anything was different from your interpretation of the plot or characters than what you remember from the graphic novel, because it's been a while since I've read it. I'd like to read it again. In fact, when I'm finished with the book I'm reading right now, I probably will read this again, just for a basis of comparison. And I think, if nothing else, if Watchmen, all it does for you is encourage you to pick up the graphic novel, I think Watchmen was a success, because it's one of the best books of all time, and you should read it. But that's just me. If it's a springboard, if it's a gateway into comic books, I think the movie was a success, because there's a lot of good comics out there. Even if you're not a comic fan, this is one of the books that you should read. And if you're a fan of my stuff, if you're a fan of games or comics in particular, it's a classic. Check it out. So I've been going on for a very long time. I'm not feeling well, so I'm going to go get some rest. Actually, I'm going to get a drink and then get some rest. But yeah, this weekend, go see Watchmen. I liked it, and I hope you'll like it too. And if not, at least you'll have something to talk about. Which, hey, you know, when you go to the movies, there's worse things to do than to come away from the movie with something to talk about, even if you didn't like the film. So, you know, if you can't afford it, you know, this is at the library. I guarantee you this is going to be at a library. So check it out. Have a good weekend, everybody. I'll be back as soon as I'm feeling better with much more material. So have a good one.